Hey guys, Rick Stone here from Stony Acres Gardening. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about growing onions indoors from seeds. And we're going to cover 5 different topics for you. I'm going to tell you why you ought to be doing it. We're going to actually talk about the timing. We'll do the how-to. We're going to get them actually planted indoors. We'll talk about how you care for them while they're growing indoors, and we'll talk a little bit about getting them planted out in the garden as well. So let's get started. Let's talk about why you ought to be growing your own seedlings indoors with your onions. So there's really 3 different ways that you can plant onions. You can plant them by seed, you can plant them by set, or you can plant them using transplants. I want you to be using transplants, okay? Let's talk about seeds first. So for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us that live in cold weather climates, by the time our gardens are ready to actually, the soil to be worked and for us to actually be planting outside, it's a little bit too late to be planting seeds for onions directly outside, okay? The reason why is because onions are a cool season crop. They like to do the bulk of their growing, especially that top growth, during the cool time of the year. And if we plant by seeds directly out in the garden, for me, that would be sometime in April that I would be able to actually do that. They're going to mature too late in the season. It'll be too hot, there'll be too much sun, the bulbing will be weird, you just won't have as good of a crop if you try to direct sow out in the garden. So the second way to grow them is using sets. So sets are these little mini onions that you can get. They're actually 1-year-old onions. They plant them and then harvest them early, and then we replant them and they grow into onions. Because they're in their second year, they actually want to go to seed. And so that really affects the quality of your onions. You don't get as big of onions, they don't store as long, and so I've never had a crop that I was really happy with growing by sets. Now you can buy store-bought transplants. There are a lot of different places that grow the transplants for you, and you can buy them at your stores or you can order them online. The problem with that is that can be pretty pricey. Sometimes those are upwards of $10 for a bundle of 50, and so that can be a little bit pricey. Whereas, you know, I paid $2.69 for this package of seeds that has several hundred seeds in it that are going to give me just a ton of seedlings for not very much money, okay? So this is the way that I prefer to do it. I want you to be growing your own seedlings indoors. So let's talk about how we do that. The first thing we want to talk about is timing. If you want a crop of really nice big onions like this beauty here, then you need to be planting your seeds indoors sooner than you think, okay? We really would like to get our seedlings out in the garden about 4 to maybe even 6 weeks before our last spring frost. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say, but we still have snow and we still have frost. That's okay. Onions are very hardy and they can take it. So we want to get them out in the garden so that they can get that initial growth going when it's really cool. It's okay if it snows on them. It's okay if they get frosted. They're going to be just fine. So about 6 weeks is what I target for getting them out, 6 weeks before my last frost date. And I want 8 to 10 week old seedlings ready to go out in the garden, which means I need to be looking at somewhere between 12 to 16 weeks before my first frost date, planting those guys indoors. So I try to target about 16 weeks before my first frost date, which for me is January 15th. So about January 15th, I'm getting my onions started. I recognize that for some of you whose last frost lands in April, you might be planting your onions in December. Okay, so it's earlier and sooner than you think because onions are very hardy and they like to get transplanted out in the garden early. I'm going to be using some seedling mix, so I've got just some store-bought seedling mix here. I have added just a little bit of my own compost to this. So I had some homegrown compost that I had this fall. I sifted it so that it was really fine, and I've added a little bit to that. You don't have to do that. So I wouldn't use store-bought compost for that. You could use some worm castings if you've got worm castings, but the store-bought composts all have too much wood in them. So use a little homemade if you've got it, but you don't have to do that because we're going to be fertilizing them anyways. And so that'll add a little nutrients if you want. Now, we are going to plant in some little cups here. There's all kinds of different ways that you can actually be growing your onion seedlings. I've seen people grow them in flats. I've seen people grow them individually in individual cells. If you want to try it that way, that's fine too. For me, I don't have the space. We grow somewhere around 200 to 250 onions a year. I don't have the space to individually seed that many onion seedlings. I just don't have that much light space under my lights in my growing space. So instead, I grow them in these cups because onions are very, very easy to transplant. They're super hardy, and you can pull and tug and separate, and they're going to be just fine. So it's okay to plant them in smaller containers, and then you can just separate them. So we're going to plant two different types. Today we're planting some Tokyo long white bunching onions. And with bunching onions, we're just going to take this container, stick it straight out in the ground when it's time to plant. And so we can actually be a little bit thicker in our seeding with these. And so I'm actually going to put about 15 or 16 seeds in this container. So that is already 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Just kind of want to spread them out. And we're going to plant these guys right in there. Okay, so that is enough for those. Again, you know, those are a bunching onion that we're going to use as a green onion, and so they don't need quite as much space. Now with a bulbing onion, you don't want to plant quite as thickly. So for these bulbing onions, and this is a red onion, it's called Flat of Italy, and they're an intermediate day onion, which is perfect for our area. And so I'm going to put, I've got about 10 seeds here that I am going to put in this container. And so we're just going to put those in. We don't want quite as many here. We will just kind of separate these out as we plant. And that does it. Now, we want to put about 1/4 inch of soil over the top of those seeds. We don't want to put too much. They're a pretty small seed. So put a little bit over the top like that. Press it down so you get some good seed to soil contact. And then we want to give them a good soak. So we're going to use our spray bottle here, and we are going to soak these guys in. That will get those seeds off and running really quickly. Then we're going to take these guys indoors. We're going to cover them up with a little bit of plastic. That will keep the humidity in for the time while we are actually growing and germinating those seedlings. Once the seedlings are germinated, we'll take that plastic off and turn the lights on. Let's talk a little bit about care while these seedlings are actually growing. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you bottom water. So bottom water is, instead of pouring water on the top of these seedlings, we actually want to pour water in the container, in the tray, and let it soak up inside. That's much gentler on those seedlings. So we want to do some bottom watering. We want to have lights on these onion seedlings, and they want to be on for about 14 to 16 hours a day. And you want to keep those lights relatively close to the surface of those onions. Once we kind of get them germinated and growing a little bit, you are going to want to start fertilizing. If you're only growing onions in a tray, so you've got a whole tray of onions, it would be probably a good choice to use a good organic, liquid, balanced fertilizer. But if you're growing your onions in with a bunch of other seedlings, and most other seedlings will prefer to have a little bit higher nitrogen fertilizer, that's okay. Your onions will be fine with a high nitrogen fertilizer. But if you're just growing them in just onions, a balanced fertilizer would be a little bit better. That would help a little bit more with root development. Once they get about 3 to 4 inches tall, they're going to start flopping over and be a little unruly. And it's okay to just trim those guys off. So just take a pair of scissors and cut them off to about 1.5 inches to 2 inches tall. You may end up doing that 2, maybe even 3 times during the growing season. This was the biggest onion I grew last year, and it came from one of my own seedlings, okay? But that seedling looked very small compared to the store-bought ones that I had as well. So recognize that your homegrown seedlings are going to be a little bit smaller than maybe what you've seen when you bought store-bought. That's okay. They catch up really quickly. Once your seedlings are about 8 to 10 weeks old, you are going to want to get them out in the garden. And so the last thing that you need to do in this growing process is give them a little time to harden off. So we do want to let them adapt a little bit to the colder conditions that are going to be happening in the garden, you know, about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. So give them 7 to 10 days of slowly acclimating them to the garden. If you've got a hoop house or a cold frame, that's a great place to start hardening them off. but do give them a little time to harden off. To plant, you actually just want to drill a little hole. I just use like a screwdriver or a wooden dowel, and I drill a little hole about 2 inches deep, and then I just kind of drop that in so that they're about, you know, 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep in the soil, kind of backfill that in. And then the last thing that I do after I planted is I like to mulch. So I either put down some compost, maybe some straw, or some even just like some lawn trimmings would be fine, but we want to mulch because that is going to keep the weeds down and the soil moisture up, both of which are going to be good for your onions. All right, so that is growing onions indoors. Let me know if you guys like this video, and if you have any questions, I'll keep an eye on the comments as well. Before we go, I just wanted to mention, if you would like to learn more about this entire seed starting, indoors seed starting process, I do have a couple of free things that you can go check out to learn more. Number one, we have an ebook, a free ebook. There's a link right up here that you can click on, and that you can go sign up for that free ebook. And then we also have a free mini course that's about 40 minutes long. It's called Seed Starting Basics. There's a link in the description of the video that you can click on to go and check that out. And if you would like to learn more about growing onions, you can check out right here my onion growing playlist. I've got several other videos that you can check out there about growing, harvesting, curing, all that kind of stuff for more on onions. So check that out as well. All right, that's all I have for you for this week. Everybody have a fantastic week. Happy gardening.